Loving it like McDonald's.
That's a good one, actually. Loving it like McDonald's. Welcome to the Ideas podcast, and today is no other different day besides us figuring out other more ideas to be more creative and to be more inclusive. Well, one of the things that are quite meaningful is disability. Where do you begin? What do you say? And how do you go about it? Well, want to know more? Because today I'm joined by an expert himself who has done numerous field work, numerous contributions to the body of work about disability rights, activism, as well as bringing about solutions to life. And I'm happy to introduce none other, Bongani Mapumulo. Is that right?
Thank you. Close enough. Close enough. I'll take it.
You can correct me as well, like Mapumulo.
Yeah, yeah. I was supposed to have an H between a U and the M.
And then what happened?
Yeah. Apparently my father was filling out the certificates, and I think he got excited that he just, got a new son, and he forgot it.
Yeah, so it made a big world of a difference, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding. there are others in my family that don't have H's, so yeah, we have a tribe within a tribe.
Yeah, no, Bongani, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us today on the show.
Yeah, finally we get to do it.
We were debriefing earlier, like it took us a year to get together, but before the year, we were passing each other on campus at university when we were studying together.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stood out quite well, and I think many of people who would also probably share the same sentiment, is your rigor and your passion.
Yeah, man.
To bring about a real improved lived experience for people. Right. Who are not just tackling day to day, but who want to be aspirational in their day to day. Connect us with how you came about making a difference, moving the needle. And where do we begin with disability?
I would say it's a few moving parts. I think it first began with observing. I would say observing how your own life interacts with student life and accessibility of spaces, and how that influences the way you get to enjoy student life. Because I think we can almost agree that being in lecture halls and attending classes and all of that is only a fraction of what a student life is about. So most of the life that you're gonna live is actually gonna be outside, meeting people, talking to people, engaging with people, and just experiencing that part of life. So, and in order for that to happen, you need to be in spaces. You need to visit friends that are living in different races from the one you are in. And I remember a very, very close friend of mine, he would always visit me in my residence because there was a lift and he could get to where I stay, but I could never be able to visit him because his residence had stairs, and basically it is impossible to visit him, right? So, and then in more you interact with other people, you're like, okay, so why some spaces are accessible, more than others, So that, I think, sort of like lit that sort of like activism, light, within myself, and I just started thinking, okay, if this affects me, it probably affects other people. So why can't, let me just find ways of bringing some of this stuff more to the fore and have conversations. And, I attended a lot of student functions and discussions. And I remember, I think you invited me to one of them. And to hear, what do other people think? And let's see if we can, push this conversation more to the front. And, sometimes if you really want to see something, get done, sometimes it just helps to do it yourself. So I think that's how I became involved. And maybe just to add another angle, I stayed in Hayes Russell Portman, which is named after the first Black rector of Stellenbosch University, and he was really, really big on active citizenship and how he foresaw how the people that live within that residence should understand that they have bigger responsibilities outside of the confines of that particular structure. So as the people that live there, we need to believe that we need to make far more change and more impact outside of just our residence. And yeah, I would say that gave me a lot of belief and what can I say, understanding that I need to be more active, and anything that I believe need to be pursued, find ways of pursuing it.
And when I love the fact that your curiosity began with that big question mark. Why are other spaces accessible and others not? And, when we speak about space, about disability, it's almost widely encompassing, not just the physical environment.
Yeah, that's true.
But you also touched on the social dynamic of it, like you want to have an enjoyable social life. A life that makes you feel like you're part of the ecosystem of humanity.
No doubt.
And looking at how the institutional preparedness has prepared you almost in different environments, from, let's say, Botman or Stellenbosch itself,
correct,
to moving across, let's say, to UCT. What would you say is the nuance that institutions can better prepare to at least create an environment where socially and environmentally or physically there's better access and mobility in terms of what we have to do?
I think layout has a lot to do with it, which unfortunately you don't get to have much of a say in. For instance, for people that have been to UCT, they'll understand that it's almost like on a slope, which is like uphill,
being raised on the mountain.
And and of course that's gonna affect space and the way it's sort of like laid out, and how the buildings are sort of like structured against each other. Yeah, so when you look at that in comparison to Stellenbosch, which is, I think it's shaped like a basin in a way, so it's a lot more flat, meaning you can, for the most part, for walking people, they can go from one building to another without needing sort of like transport, which in UCT it's a pretty big thing. There are like buses that's gonna take you from res to class and stuff like that, which we didn't really see much of in Stellenbosch, because you could simply get to where you need to be in a matter of, I don't know, 5 to 15 minutes or something like that. So yeah, for me, I did live sort of like at extreme ends of the campus, because where I stayed, I think it was on Victoria, like up Victoria, and my faculty was right in the middle of Merriman, right? Sure. So I remember we having conversations with the disability units at the time. I had a manual wheelchair, and they're saying, how does this affect how I function? And I remember it was summer, right at the height of February, March, and it was hot. And Stellenbosch heat can get really, really hot. So it was affecting how I study, how I function, with my academic activities. And that's when they sort of like started having conversations that, okay, maybe we need a different assistive device that's going to help you function a bit more better, or I should say function more in tune with this the layout of the Stellenbosch campus, which was great, because that enabled me to sort of know that, okay, I can reserve sort of like my energy for the academic stuff that matters without nearly thinking about my physique as much, which with the manual wheelchair, it was basically all on me, and because it's self-propelled. So yeah, I think from that sort of like angle, it helped a lot. Maybe to some people it might not make too much sense, but if you think about a full day where you start, I don't know, at 8 and end at 4, by the time 4 o'clock reaches, you might just be finished and you just want to rest or sleep or anything like that. But student life kind of like has to carry on, so you got to think about stuff like that.
And I love the fact that you gave us a vivid picture, but I think maybe it might be helpful also just to us understand that you're from the life of the biggest challenges that you had to deal with in terms of getting the tech, in terms of getting the access that you need.
Yep.
What would you say in terms of confronting different parties to get your life on the road?
Yeah.
How would you say are the biggest challenges, or what would you say are the biggest challenges or myths surrounding disability itself that you were confronted with?
Yeah. So I would say my beginnings with my schooling, because when I think about, in within disability, you have either inclusive education or special needs education, whereby inclusive, you basically have a mainstream school which is gonna have kids that happen to have disabilities, but they are basically all within one setting, right? Then you have special needs education, whereby everyone has a disability of some sort, right? Meaning you don't have to worry about things that things that have to do with access and lifts and things like that, because the layout is set up for everyone, to sort of like be able to function and thrive in a way. So yeah, the issue of difference is almost like a non-entity, right? However, universities aren't like that.
It's a melting pot of everything.
Yeah. And you might find that the people that are around you have never interacted in any way with someone, with a disability of any kind. So it's basically, it's like you're at a very, very interesting sort of like juncture of how are you going to function. So one element that tends to help when it comes to functioning is assistive technology. And we had to, and I'm saying we as a student, and along with the office that sort of like coordinates access and functionality for students at the time. The disability unit had conversations with sort of like my sponsors to say, okay, we have a student who's like this, we know that you're already paying for his tuition and residence and all of that. However, for him to function better, this is what we need to think about. And I guess I can say that it was a privilege that those conversations went, very, very well. And I remember meeting sort of like those sponsors, because I think they came around like during the course of the year, just to check on how their investment is going.
Anonymously.
And I found that it was a foundation of a family from years ago that actually seek out students that are sort of like in situations similar to myself, and they sort of like helps with grants, and but obviously you have to be in some sort of like education setting of some sort. So I guess I was in the right place, and I think it helps that they can tell that you are trying to do something with your life, not just educating yourself, but you're trying to make a difference to other people that are probably in a similar situation with yourself. So I think even that was an introduction to how communicating is important just for your own needs and to be able to advocate for other people's needs. So the fact that they were able to take care of me in that way, it also fueled that active citizenship bug to think, you gotta be able to do more, and you gotta try and do more, because the more you are able to do for yourself, the more you can be able to do for others.
Yeah, and you touched on such an important aspect. I think I know we have caught on about reasonable accommodation, and you talk about agency as well in terms of that relationship as well, or the world of work response, or the institutional response to it, and what is exactly is reasonable and what is accommodation. Maybe invite us to that journey to what is reasonable accommodation within this context, and how do we become more inclusive.
Yeah, it's a very, very burning sort of like subject, because it tends to be sort of connected to resources, in a sense that an institution will understand sometimes that there is a need for a specific form of assistance, but it also has to function within the confines of what is available, or what is possible, what is reachable in terms of finding resources to help. I can't speak too much on how the world of work functions, although I've heard some stories about how for some employees with disabilities, for instance, they tend to have problems with being able to adjust or adapt to their sort of like workplaces, because you find that an employer will say, yes, we believe in equality, which means, we want to help our employees, feel like part of the workforce, and, they use terms like family and things like that. And yeah. But if you look at it from a point of view of equity, right? Equity is actually about what are your specific needs as an individual, as opposed to equality, of which we are just gonna help everyone with however that we think the people need, of which once you talk about equity, then it has to be a conversation. You can't just simply say, we think this is what you need and this is what we can provide, but rather let's have a conversation about how can we help you function better, how can we help you thrive in this environment. Because if me as an individual, an employee, or who's part of the system now, if I can function better, I can produce better, I'm able to contribute to this workplace. So for me, that is how I tend to look at how reasonable accommodation is. However, I think it's a conversation that should be ongoing, because I think it can always be better.
Yeah. And I know that you demonstrated, I think, in your response, that the education has been largely on the marginalized. I mean, you look at different camps of not just disability, there's also like the invisible part of it, that people are also grappling with, like now neurodiversity being the bandwagon or the catch-all of neuroinclusion, or how we can be better in the space. Who should be driving the education of how we can do it better?
It's hard to think it should be one class or one group, because I think we need each other in some way. True. For instance, I will make a reference to my experience with Stellenbosch. As much as, for instance, they would say this is what we can help you with, but it would be in partnership with IT, that could that would be able to tell me that, okay, this is what we have available, and this is how we can help this to or this is what we can provide for you to be able to function better. So yeah, if I would say who should be in charge of the conversation, I would say as the users, it's important that we are involved, because I think it helps when we co-create and produce things that we can take sort of like collective ownership of. Because if you think that as as a tech person or as a tech provider or a designer of some sort, you can just say, okay, whatever I read on paper is what I'm going to provide just as is. You might fall short, or you might miss some things. I think when you have the end users in mind, or in the room, or as part of the conversation, I think it tends to help have a better product or have a better outcome. So yeah, I really, really believe in collective participation. I think it also helps with networks. For instance, currently, this dips a little bit into a little bit into my research, my current research. For instance, I'm part of the Bertha Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship. However, the angle of assistive technology touches on health and medical technology, which is almost like another department, which is, I think it's called UCT MedTech, if I'm not mistaken. However, I'm also interested in ethics, of how do we use technology for good, and that's a completely different sort of like department, where there's a part of me that wants to find a way of how do I get these departments to speak to each other, which is something that I'm really, really, really excited about. I'm currently doing like a literary review to see how I can find the connections between the literatures, but I think within the short term sort of like a short-term goal that I have is to get the staff and the units and the departments to sort of like understand how they can co-create and how they can help sort of like figure out similar problems using ideas from different, sort of like departments. Because I believe, or at least for me myself, I believe the more ideas you have, the more resources you have when it comes to problem solving. So yeah, I think within, sort of like my immediate space currently, it's something that I'm really, really excited about.
Yeah, and I think touching on that take, I think I remember you highlighted such a beautiful example about how not only has it been transformative to neurotypical or able-bodied people.
Yeah.
How do we now move that mindset of globalizing solutions in tech? And driving that innovation piece to cultivate that culture.
That is such an interesting question, because just last week, I wasn't part of the panel discussion myself, but I was in the audience, and we were talking about, well, I wanted to engage them on when it comes to South Africa as a resource constrained sort of like context where technology tends to be hard to access because it's expensive. It needs to be imported, a whole lot of resources have to go into it. And when that happens, it tends to cost a bit more.
And I'm guessing it's going to cost more with these trade wars happening.
even more, yeah.
Where does the tech come from, by the way?
With the tariffs.
Where does it come from? Where do we import from?
It's different parts of the world.
Okay, yeah.
Sometimes it could be Europe. Sometimes it can be America, depending on how unique or specific that particular tech is. However, what I learned recently is there are a whole lot of innovations that are actually coming out of the country, simply because the question has been asked of what are we going to produce as a country for our own context, sort of thing, because I think if we understand that in order to help our own people, we need to understand them. But in order to do that well, we need to research and we need to go out there and find that information and that data and all the important sort of like components that go into developing stuff. I think it's not only going to help us as a country, however, it's also going to help other countries that are similar to us, because as an environment, we are not that different from most other so-called third or second world, where accessing technology is very, very expensive. However, there is a huge need, whether from a health point of view or disability point of view. So, and we can build that knowledge that's going to count in our favor in a sense that we are building assets. So yeah, like that department has biomedical engineers, it has doctors, it has technologists and people like that, which I'm very, very fascinated to meet. It also helps to find out like who writes in what point of view. Because my experience is going to be different from yours.
True.
Your perspective and your point of view, lived experience and things like that. I think those things matter a whole lot, because I think they tend to decide or gear how the narrative is going to be shaped, and just in terms of like power dynamics and power imbalances, because I happen to believe that the users matter a lot, because especially if you are designing something that's going to be in the hands of those people, it has to be something that's going to be helpful over a long over a long period of time. And part of my research is exactly about that, because for a low middle income country like ours, underserved or under-resourced communities matter a lot. And yeah, I remember just leaving that event. The lady that was assisting me there, because it was the first time in the building, she was like, "You realize that you are speaking for a lot of people," and I was like, "It's been like that for years." So I guess I'm somehow used to it, and yeah, but it's you know it's one of those things that tends to be a privilege in some way, and tends to be something else in other contexts. But I just tend to look at it as it's having an opportunity to make some sort of social change, and it's something I happen to enjoy doing.
Yeah, and I think talking about the difference in lived experiences and finding resonance. I mean, intersectionality is one of the biggest tools that we use in the field to evangelize a lot. It's the bandwagon too about so many things that every community wants to win with.
As difficult as it can
difficult
be.
as it is, because it's quite
somebody got to do it. I'm one of those people.
No, man. I think from an intersectional perspective, I think you've contributed also to how sexuality is also informed of masculinity in a way. Is directly proportional to your lived experience within one lens. And perhaps you may correct me if I'm wrong. What would you be thinking the approach should be around sexuality or masculinity from your lived experiences as well?
So that was also one of the most fascinating studies that I was ever I got the privilege to be part of, because up until that point I didn't really think about it all that much, like what goes into how I see myself. It's one of those things that you don't really think about up until someone asks why do you behave the way you do when you interact with a woman, for instance, but you don't do the same thing with a guy. And why do you believe culturally, for instance, she should behave a particular way when it comes to you as a man, right? And that is before you even include a matter of being a black Zulu-speaking disabled man from KZN with a particular conservative background and things like that. So I remember just having all of these questions and thinking, how the hell I'm gonna write this thing?
Yeah,
because I've taken on the project now. Like I can't drop it. Like my core, let me call them co-authors, they've given me this thing with an expectation that I'm gonna produce something. And like I remember, I think one of my first few lines, even when I wrote that, this is an ongoing sort of like exercise, and it's possible that if I get an opportunity to write about it in the future, it might come out a whole lot differently. However, I was gonna try and capture where I was at the time mentally, So I just started looking into stuff about alphas and what hegemonic masculinities are,
patriarchy,
and and why is there even a hierarchy when it comes to what kind of masculinity is prioritized over the other, and how as men sometimes we put ourselves in those sort of like classes and groups, as opposed to when I see such and such, financially it puts them into this group. And if you tend to not have as much resources, you're gonna be at the bottom. And physically, in terms of what you're able to to do, like take something like sports, for instance, which is something that is an ambit where physical shape and excellence in ability is something that is expected. But in sexuality terms, it's something that is almost like
top of mind.
It makes a man attractive. So, and now you start thinking, okay, I haven't done much sports in my life, does it mean I'm not attractive? And you started thinking like, how do yeah, maybe if I got a chance to, to do interviews and things like that, because that's not what I did. I merely just went through literature, used a little bit of my own lived experience, and to try and find sort of like answers to that. So
what does dating life now look like, given that investigation, given that thought process?
I would I would say I think I arrived at a point where I started searching more sort of like within, when it comes to how I'm gonna make sense of my own makeup, because I don't know, when I think about, just if you search externally, you might be searching for a very long time, because you're gonna be looking, okay, this is what's supposed to fulfill me, this is what is supposed to bring
some form of happiness,
or some sort of validation, as opposed to when my father, for instance, was when he was still alive, what did he think was special about me, and if he can look at this disabled boy and think he has something to contribute to the world, I can't allow the external world to sort of like downplay that and make me think that I have less to contribute, and so I think from that point of view, I wouldn't say I started regarding myself as the best thing out there, but it helped with building a stronger sort of like identity where I don't feel like someone else needs to affirm what I have or what I'm about. I think we all will take some sort of losses in life. It's just part of growing and it's part of living. But I think what I tend to lean more towards is just my own personal story, and understanding that if my life didn't matter, I would have got shot and I would have just died. But the fact that it didn't happen, and I'm still around, and some of the things that I've been able to do have helped other people, and some of the stuff that I write about, other people read and get touched by, and it is a way of touching other people's lives, and I think that's what it's all about.
I think maybe from an FAQ basis, I'm sure you've engaged with a lot of questions. Probably most of them are FAQs. You probably have like a script like reply number 1. What are some of the key questions that you feel that maybe are part and parcel of a broader ecosystem problem, or a part of the solution itself?
Maybe questions along which area? I
think maybe questions around maybe your identity, or how you now navigate different spaces, given your own affirmations as well.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing sometimes about pursuing and trying to actualize ideas that you really feel passionate about, is that it really tends to put you in rooms where, for the most part, you might be the only person that looks like you. For instance, currently, like I don't know whether I mentioned, but I'm at the GSB 4 days a week, because part of signing up, as much as
the GSB being Graduate School of Business.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I should have said that the whole thing. Yeah. Hey, it's UCT. They use abbreviations. Yeah. I'm part of this community now.
Ecosystem effect.
And part of me becoming part of sort of like that environment is visibility. simply because it's a space that has been I don't want to say like quintessentially white, but definitely able-bodied.
In the vast majority.
Yeah. For instance, in my class, I'm definitely only person with a physical disability, and I spoke to the librarian who has been there, I don't know, for 20-something years. And she says the last person who was a wheelchair user, I think, was, I don't know, early 2000s or something like that. And he was injured leading up to classes, meaning he's not a permanent wheelchair user, so to speak. So basically, I'm the first wheelchair user to go there. So I find myself in rooms where, like, I'm literally the only person who is like myself. And for instance, I'm currently doing a master's. Most of the functions that I go to, a PhD is so common that people will automatically think you also got one. Just simply because we are in this, all in this space together, So part of it, I think it's good because it's inspiring, and because you can interact with them as peers, as opposed to they're up here, you are down here. But it also, also reminds you that, maybe you still have, some distances to cover. However, what I find really gratifying is when I speak to them, for instance, I share my story and sometimes I share my research, they all tell me you have something valuable to contribute. And I should never feel insecure about, whether it's a background or whether it's how I look or whatever, insecurity that comes with, being myself. Yet I should own up to what I am. And, what did Miss Essay say?
The current one?
No, the one who recently got married. That you should take up space.
Yeah.
And she's right, you don't think about that, such things up until you are in a space where you feel like a little bit out of place, and but now you almost forget what has brought you there. There's a reason. Yeah, like our program director is very, very intentional about reminding us that you were selected for a reason. You belong here. And she also said something that is even more interesting. She said, you need to make as much money so that we can get much money from you.
Yeah, and be a donor.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I basically need money to to feed more people, which it's not a bad idea, I guess. But it also spoke to the fact that there are basically more resources when you are intentional about what you want to do. Meaning, stop thinking about, I don't have this, I don't have that, therefore I can't pursue, which sometimes tends to be a stumbling block for most people. And I don't know whether there's a space for a personal story.
Yes, please.
So leading to this year, right, I applied just like everyone else, and I'm waiting anxiously. And then, it's crazy. It wasn't even a letter. It was an SMS, congratulations, you're into the program. And then I think it said, see you next year, Jan, or something like that. Something so casual. I'm like, really?
Is it proper? Is it legit?
Exactly. And I'm thinking, okay, I need to confirm this somehow. Anyway, but now I start having those questions. Okay, how am I gonna pay for this thing? I definitely don't have money for myself. I need to find a way to get in. Plus, they have what is called a deposit, for the course.
Which are not cheap, by the way.
No, 25 grand to be specific. 25 grand. I'm like, wow, I never needed a deposit back in Stellies.
And
who these people think they are?
And just to contextualize that deposit, was it different pricing for you because you need different access, or is it?
No. It's for everyone.
All right, yeah.
everyone. For you to get on the class list,
Sure.
they need 25K. Anyway, I start thinking. Okay. All right. I'll apply for stuff because obviously there are always president scholarship out there and stuff, and which is great. However, most of them were saying like, "Wow, we'll give you an answer in December," and blah, blah, blah. And they had a deadline. I think it was September or something. So I'm applying, but I go back to them and I'm like, "Okay, guys, like thanks for the place in the program and whatnot, but I don't have this deposit fee. However, I've applied for things, and I have a lot of hope. They're like, we don't usually do this, but we'll give you extra time." Anyway, earlier I spoke about the foundation that helped me with my first electrical chair, right? I think of them, and I still had their if
What's the name of that one? If you feel comfortable sharing.
It's Emily Fuchs, Fuchs Foundation.
Okay.
Carl and Emily Fuchs. I think they were a couple. Yes. Carl and Emily Fuchs Foundation. Amazing people. I sent an email to them, and I'm like, you guys helped me in my undergrad, and I'm now doing a master's at UCT, Graduate School of Business, and I'm thinking, oh my God, the amount of documentation these people are gonna ask me for. Anyway, because that's what happens when you are applying for funding. You're gonna have to submit stuff. Simple email back. All right, how much do you need? I send that. Okay, we're gonna have a meeting in, I think, end of October. So we'll let you know by middle of November. November comes, I get a phone call to the director of the foundation. Thank you for reaching out to us. We have 50,000 for you.
Oh,
I'm like, wow. We're gonna give you a letter. You're gonna blah blah blah. Just get us UCT's banking details. I'm like, I don't have to worry about this deposit fee.
Yeah.
All right. Look, it's 50 grand. Maybe to someone else, gonna be like, it's not a lot. Okay. Probably isn't, because the course is 170 something. Anyway, it gets me in. That's all I need. So that happens, and I'm really, really, really grateful. I go back to them, share my gratitude and everything. But of course, I still have the other exposure. I don't know. I'm not good at this counting thing, but I'm still gonna owe the university basically. Anyway. 3 weeks into this year, after classes, and I attend conferences, because I enjoy being amongst people that study what I study, because you'll meet interesting people, and also you'll get to find what are other interesting topics out there. Maybe it can help reshape your research question, or anywhere along those lines. So I do a lot of that, and somewhere during the course of that, I meet the director of this place, the Bertha Center.
Okay, yeah.
So now I'm being an ambassador.
Yeah.
And she starts asking me about what my life is about, and how I ended up here, and what people tend to ask the most when they see somebody they don't, or maybe someone who's in a situation where they don't interact with people like that on a daily. They ask, like, so how is the access here? How are you experiencing the space, and I tell them, like, hey, I see that the ramps are new,
because of you.
What took you guys so long? And like, nah, it's something we should have fixed long time. Anyway, I'm digressing.
Yeah.
I get to, know the director quite well. I get to, hear her background, and, anyway. One of the mornings, I'm in the GSB, she calls. Unfortunately, I'm in a meeting with another lecturer, because I'm still trying to find a supervisor. And then later on, she sent me a text that, she needs to talk to me or whatever. Like, why would the director be looking for me? I'm thinking maybe it's to be part of a,
work group or
panel discussion. Yeah, something. It turns out she had a scholarship for me.
Wow.
100 and something, 40, blah, blah, blah. They only had one for the class.
Wow.
And I got it.
Sure.
Anyway,
congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The point I'm just trying to make is, sometimes when you want to pursue stuff, the question of resources sometimes overwhelms us to a point of inaction, and sometimes you just need to start. Just go for the thing. If you can find food that's gonna take you to the next day, just do that. The next day I don't know. I embody that sort of like mantra now, where it's like tomorrow will sort itself out. If these ideas are burning in my head to a point that I can go from week to week, everything will sort of take care of itself, so to speak. So
and I think I love the fact that you touched earlier about positive representation. I think part of it, or part of my question about positive representation, is resonating in what you replied with.
Right.
But I just wanted to get perhaps a better picture, because I know you earlier highlighted that if someone said that you are like a bold representation of so many people who want to be in the similar position of agency. What would you say is more needed for positive representation to be much more a grassroots thing, instead of a chance or once in a lifetime opportunity that we now see in the world?
Like more people like myself.
Yeah, basically. Like more people just coming up and normalizing inclusion. Basically, that's what I'm saying. Because we live in such a world where it's NCDI right now, and we don't know how long that sentiment will last. And it's easier for more people to have their own ways to come about.
It's hard to think how can it be done sort of like systemically, because no matter how we look at the world, this inequality thing is pretty serious.
It's big.
It's
sure.
Like just because we have X amount of millionaires and billionaires
doesn't make us.
No, like you have someone today who doesn't know what they're gonna eat. Like it's just a reality. And poverty again is a real thing. It's one of those just unfortunate realities that I come from a sociology background, and we studied a lot about that kind of stuff. And as you know, South Africa is literally one of the unequal cities in the world. So from that point of view, it's really, really hard to imagine how you equalize representation. However, my personal story, I tend to look at it from a point of view of background, where you come from, the people that believe in you, the people that will say, despite barriers and the obstacles that sort of like stand in your way, what do they do when those stumbling blocks happen to you? For me, I would say as a kid, and I never really used to understand what he meant, but my father, and I'm paraphrasing, but he used to say something along the lines of, you're not gonna need legs. You're not gonna need legs to succeed. I think he was saying that in comparison to my brothers, because I have 4 brothers in my family, and I'm the only one who went to boarding school. So I'm the one who was like taken outside of the family setting. So everyone would be home. I'll be all the way in boarding school. So I'm bringing up influential figures, because I think when we have people that believe in us, we tend to believe what they say.
Yeah.
Even if sometimes it's like you're really not sure where they are getting what they are saying from. But if your mother or your father or whoever that's very, very close to you says, you are made to make a difference out there in the world, you tend to believe them. So, and sometimes it doesn't mean there's a whole lot of resources that needs to go behind it, just for them to say those important things when you need to hear that. Because for me, that helped me believe that, as I said, I went to a special school, so it made me believe that there's a bigger world out there. Like my world, my life is not gonna end here. And I also learned that it was a privilege that I had access to physios and psychologists, for instance, that sort of like built all of those things from a very, very early age, like 6, 7, which I've also learned that unfortunately not everyone has access to.
True.
So if we say we need more Bonganis, I would say let's build more facilities with people that believe in those sort of like kids. Because I think the earlier you build kids' minds to believe that, they have a role to play out there and they can make a difference and they can pursue things that seem impossible.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a motivational speaker.
Yeah.
But, just to do stuff that feels insurmountable sometimes, it's like, like you need those people that are going to see that early in you. And because even if you meet challenges along the way, you're going to be like, there's that one teacher though, who always, believe that I have something to contribute. And that matters a lot when you come across, challenges and problems in life. So yeah, for me, I would say those influential figures are really, really important. If they are not in the home, in the schools, in I don't know, the churches or, sports clubs or whatever, but those, for me, those voices matter a whole lot.
Yeah, and I know that with such topics, there's so much to talk about.
Yeah,
and there's always little time,
which is good.
Which is good.
It means we are covering ground. Yeah.
But I think for us, is the last part of this discussion. Yeah. What would you say is the most compelling message that perhaps people are not hearing enough of and should hear more of?
That I would say that there are answers within places that you might least expect them to come from. And I think maybe I'm wearing my researcher hat here. Sometimes we think, with all the books and the journals that we study and all the material that we need to that we have to go through, and that's important because obviously you're not going to pass without that. Yeah. But sometimes it's about just reaching out to the people that you might think are not participants in the general broader world. And that happened a lot for me in Stellenbosch, for instance, when I was a participant in other people's projects and they just wanted to hear my voice. Like, that's like, we have these questions, we just want to hear what you think. And because I would say it built me to believe that, I have something to say. So if I've got something to say, surely there are other people with, something to say. So I need to find those people. Because I believe they will be able to make my journey and my contribution worth that much more than I can do if I'm only focusing on the dominant voices, and a lot of what I'm doing currently has got a lot to do with find those unheard voices. And I think it speaks to the point you mentioned earlier about, let's blow this representation thing as much as we can, because like I said earlier, the more voices we have is the more ideas we have, is the more resources we have. And there'll always be problems in the world. However, with more ideas, it means we can bring more solutions in the world, and the more contributions you have, the more you're able to tackle them. So
no, nothing for us without us. I once again
something along those lines.
So thank you so much, Bongani, for having us and joining us today on this
really
conversation.
Good, yeah.
So thank you so much for having us as well, and thank you for your time.
Yes,
I know it's been an incredible, challenging time for us, but thank you so much in this May Day of wars.
Thank you for letting me know that I was supposed to to be the first.
Yes,
guest in
that's
the
what
show.
no is.
Because I know people are not gonna believe me when I say it.
Yeah.
So
It's on
you know,
record when we do that.
exactly. Because I remember when you were starting this thing, and I was like, "Wow, someone I actually quite know is doing podcasting." How cool is that? You know, because normally when you look at this thing like on YouTube or TV or whatever, you're like, "Wow, there must be something special about those people." You know, and now you can be like, "No, someone you know is special." You know what I mean? Because they have taken the the step to actually start this thing, and they are actually doing it. And I'm a big fan of starters. You know, because sometimes you don't have answers, but it's like, I want to just try this thing out. And so yeah, kudos.
Thank you so much.
Kudos for going for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank
man.
you also for joining us for today's conversation. As always, it's always a pleasure to have your ear time with us. And please stay tuned and please follow and subscribe.
Space,
yeah, thank you so much to UCT as well.
Yeah, shout out. I'll give them a shout out in the socials.